close your eyes for a moment and imagine the deepest, most restful sleep you've ever experienced. Perhaps it was during a camping trip, away from the glow of screens and the hum of modern life. Or maybe it was during a power outage when the world fell silent and dark around you. Now, imagine if that quality of sleep wasn't a rare treat, but your nightly reality. Tonight, we're going to journey back over 1,000 years to the fjords and forests of Scandinavia, where the Vikings lived lives that seem almost impossibly distant from our own. These were people who sailed across unknown seas, who built long ships with nothing but hand tools, who carved out settlements in some of the harshest climates on Earth. But perhaps most remarkably, they enjoyed something that eludes millions of us today: truly restorative natural sleep. The Vikings, those seafaring people of medieval Scandinavia, lived in harmony with rhythms that we've almost entirely forgotten. Their sleep wasn't just rest, it was a cornerstone of their society, woven into the very fabric of their daily existence. From the smoky warmth of their longhouses to the seasonal cycles that governed their lives, every aspect of Viking culture seemed designed, whether intentionally or not, to promote the kind of deep healing sleep that our ancestors took for granted. As we explore their world together, you'll discover how the Vikings created what might have been the most sleep-friendly civilization in human history. So settle back, let your breathing slow, and prepare to drift into a world where sleep was not a luxury to be stolen between obligations, but a natural, sacred part of life itself. Daily life immersion, the rhythm of Viking sleep. The first light of dawn creeps slowly across the Scandinavian landscape, filtering through the small, carefully placed windows of a Viking longhouse. But this is not the harsh, sudden awakening of modern life. No alarms shrieking, no artificial lights flooding your consciousness. Instead, the day begins as gently as it ended, with the soft, gradual brightening that signals the Earth's natural rhythm. Imagine yourself lying on a thick bed of furs and woven wool, your body warm despite the cool morning air. Around you, the longhouse is still largely quiet, filled only with the soft breathing of your family and the gentle crackling of embers in the central hearth. This is how Vikings began each day, not with jarring interruption, but with a slow, natural emergence from the depths of sleep. The Viking approach to sleep began with their understanding of darkness and light. In the far northern reaches where many Viking communities thrived, the dramatic seasonal changes created sleep patterns that were intimately connected to the natural world. During the long winter months, when daylight might last only a few precious hours, the Vikings embraced extended periods of rest. Their bodies naturally produced melatonin in response to the extended darkness, allowing them to sleep for 10, 12, even 14 hours during the darkest months. This wasn't seen as laziness or indulgence. It was survival wisdom passed down through generations. The Vikings understood something we've forgotten. That winter sleep was a time of restoration, of gathering strength for the demanding seasons ahead. They would rise late, move slowly through their morning routines, and retire early, often by what we might consider mid-afternoon. The rhythm of their lives pulsed with the Earth's own heartbeat. During summer, when the midnight sun painted the sky in endless twilight, their sleep patterns shifted again. They would work longer hours, taking advantage of the extended daylight for farming, building, and raiding. But even then, they maintained a respect for rest that is foreign to our modern sensibilities. They understood that sleep wasn't just about the number of hours, but about the quality of that rest. The Viking longhouse itself was designed as a sanctuary for sleep. Picture the long, low building, its walls thick with timber and earth, creating a natural insulation against both cold and noise. The interior was a single great room, but this wasn't the open-plan chaos of modern living. Instead, it was carefully organized to promote rest and tranquility. Along the walls, raised platforms served as sleeping areas, each family group having their own designated space. These platforms were built about 3 feet off the ground, raising sleepers above the drafts that might sweep across the floor. The surfaces were covered with layers of sheep's wool, reindeer hide, and carefully woven textiles that had been accumulated over years. These weren't just beds. They were soft, warm nests that cradled the body in comfort. The central hearth provided both warmth and a gentle, flickering light that helped regulate the body's natural circadian rhythms. Unlike the harsh LED lights of today, which can disrupt melatonin production, the warm glow of the fire created an atmosphere that naturally encouraged the onset of sleep. The Vikings would gather around this fire in the evening, sharing stories, making repairs to tools and clothing, and gradually winding down as the flames died to embers. Their evening routines were masterclasses in sleep preparation. As the sun set or during winter months, as the brief daylight faded, families would begin their slow transition toward rest. There were no screens to stimulate the mind, no artificial lights to trick the brain into thinking it was still day. Instead, there was the hypnotic dance of firelight, the soft murmur of conversation, and the gradual quieting of daily activities. The Vikings ate their final meal of the day well before sleep, understanding instinctively what modern sleep science has proven, that late eating can disrupt rest. Their evening meal was typically simple, perhaps some preserved fish, fermented dairy, and hearty grains. They would drink ale or mead, but in moderation, recognizing that while alcohol might help them fall asleep initially, it would disturb the deeper, more restorative stages of sleep later in the night. As the fire died down, family members would perform their evening ablutions, washing hands and faces in wooden bowls, combing their hair with carved bone combs, and changing into their sleeping garments. These weren't elaborate night clothes, but simple linen shifts that allowed the skin to breathe while providing warmth. The ritual of changing clothes served as a psychological signal that the day was ending and rest was beginning. Then came the settling into their sleeping furs. Imagine sinking into layers of soft wool and warm hide, your body immediately embraced by materials that had been carefully prepared and maintained. The furs had been cleaned, softened, and arranged to provide optimal comfort. Wool-filled pillows supported the head and neck, while extra furs could be pulled up for additional warmth as needed. The soundscape of a Viking longhouse at night was a symphony of tranquility. There were no mechanical hums, no distant traffic, no electronic buzzes. Instead, there was the gentle breathing of family members, the soft settling of timber as the house cooled, and perhaps the distant sound of wind through the trees or waves against the shore. These natural sounds, rather than disturbing sleep, actually helped to deepen it, creating a consistent, soothing background that masked any sudden noises that might cause awakening. The Vikings also understood something about temperature that we've lost in our climate-controlled world. Their longhouses were warm near the fire, but cooler toward the walls, creating natural temperature zones. People could adjust their comfort by moving closer to or further from the heat source, or by adding or removing layers of furs. This variable temperature environment actually promoted better sleep, as the body's core temperature naturally drops during rest. Privacy in the longhouse was achieved not through walls, but through carefully hung textiles and the understood social rhythms of family life. Children slept close to parents, while teenagers and young adults had their own areas. The elderly were honored with the warmest, most comfortable positions. This arrangement fostered a sense of security and belonging that contributed to peaceful rest. The Vikings' approach to sleep wasn't just about the physical environment. It was deeply connected to their spiritual and emotional well-being. They believed that sleep was a time when the soul could travel, when dreams carried messages from the gods, and when the body renewed itself for the challenges ahead. This reverence for sleep as a sacred time meant that it was protected and prioritized in ways that seem almost impossible in our modern world. Their sleep was also synchronized with their community. In a world without artificial lighting, entire settlements would naturally wind down together as darkness fell. There were no night shifts, there were 24-hour businesses, No neighbors staying up late with bright lights and loud music. The whole community moved together through the rhythms of waking and sleeping, creating a collective embrace of rest that reinforced individual sleep patterns. The quality of Viking sleep was enhanced by their physical lifestyle. Days filled with demanding physical work, farming, building, sailing, fighting left their bodies genuinely tired in a way that our sedentary modern lives rarely achieve. They didn't need to find time for exercise. Their daily survival required constant physical exertion. This natural tiredness, combined with their outdoor lifestyle and exposure to natural light during waking hours, created ideal conditions for deep, restorative sleep. Even their diet contributed to better sleep. The Vikings ate foods that were naturally rich in tryptophan and magnesium: fish, dairy products, and whole grains. They consumed no caffeine, no processed sugars, and no artificial additives that might interfere with sleep. Their bodies were fed with pure, natural foods that supported rather than disrupted their rest. As we consider the Viking approach to sleep, we begin to understand that their superior rest wasn't just a byproduct of their lifestyle. It was fundamental to their success as a people. Their well-rested minds could plan complex raids and trading expeditions. Their restored bodies could endure the physical demands of their harsh environment. Their peaceful sleep gave them the resilience to face uncertainty and danger with courage and determination. The Vikings had discovered through generations of living close to the natural world what we only beginning to understand through modern sleep science. That rest isn't just time spent unconscious, but a vital process of physical and mental restoration that determines the quality of our waking lives. Biography event: Eric the Red and the Sleep Rhythms of Exploration. In the year 982, a red-bearded Norseman named Eric Thorvaldsson, whom history would remember as Eric the Red, found himself exiled from Iceland for 3 years. This banishment, decreed after a series of violent disputes, would inadvertently lead to one of the most remarkable examples of how Viking sleep patterns enabled extraordinary human achievement. Eric's story isn't just one of exploration and settlement. It is a testament to how proper rest could sustain the human spirit through the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Picture Eric as he prepared for his exile, knowing he would spend 3 years in the unknown waters west of Iceland. The Vikings had heard rumors of land in that direction, glimpses of distant shores seen through the mists, stories told by sailors blown off course. But no one had systematically explored these waters, and certainly no one had attempted to establish a permanent settlement there. Eric's exile would become an opportunity to push the boundaries of the known world, but only because he possessed something essential: the deep, restorative sleep that would sustain him through years of uncertainty. Eric's preparation for exile reveals the Viking understanding of sleep as preparation for challenge. In the months before his departure, he would have followed the traditional Viking pattern of winter rest, long hours of sleep during the darkest months, allowing his body to build reserves of energy and resilience. The Vikings believed that sleep was like a deep well from which one could draw strength, and Eric would need every drop of that strength for the journey ahead. The ship that carried Eric into exile was a masterpiece of Viking engineering, designed not just for sailing, but for living. The crew's sleeping arrangements on these long voyages reveal another aspect of Viking sleep wisdom. Unlike modern sailors, who might work in shifts around the clock, Viking crews organized their sea voyages around collective rest periods. When conditions allowed, the entire crew would sleep together, usually hauling the ship onto a beach or finding a sheltered cove. Imagine Eric and his followers during those first weeks of exploration, sailing through unknown waters under the midnight sun of the Arctic summer. Their sleep schedule adapted to the endless daylight, but they maintained their commitment to rest. They would find protected harbors where they could beach their ships, and there they would create temporary sleeping arrangements, using the ship's sails as shelter and their own cloaks and furs as bedding. The quality of their sleep during this exploration was crucial to their survival. Navigation in these treacherous waters required sharp mental acuity, the ability to read subtle changes in wind and wave, and the judgment to distinguish between safe harbors and dangerous shores. A sleep-deprived navigator could easily lead his crew to disaster on hidden rocks or into the path of a storm. Eric's success in mapping the coastline of what would become Greenland depended on his crew's ability to remain alert and focused, which in turn depended on their commitment to proper rest. When Eric finally discovered the land he would name Greenland, his approach to establishing the first settlement again demonstrated the Viking understanding of sleep as foundational to survival. The initial shelters they built were simple, but designed with sleep in mind. Using a combination of stone, turf, and driftwood, they created structures that prioritized warmth and protection from the wind. The sleeping areas were dug slightly into the ground, taking advantage of the Earth's natural insulation, and lined with whatever furs and textiles they had brought from Iceland. That first winter in Greenland was a test of endurance that few people in history have faced. The darkness was deeper and longer than even what they had known in Iceland. The cold was bitter and unrelenting. Food was scarce, and the psychological pressure of isolation in an unknown land must have been overwhelming. Yet Eric and his followers survived, and their survival was built on their ability to maintain healthy sleep patterns even under extreme stress. The Vikings had learned through generations of harsh winters that sleep was not a luxury to be sacrificed. When times were tough, it was precisely when times were tough that sleep became most essential. During that first Greenland winter, Eric's group would have extended their sleep periods even further than usual, spending perhaps 16 hours out of every 24 in rest. This wasn't laziness or depression. It was a survival strategy that allowed them to conserve energy, maintain their immune systems, and preserve their mental health during months of extreme hardship. Eric's personal sleep habits during this time reveal the individual discipline that complemented the collective Viking approach to rest. Historical accounts suggest that Eric maintained a strict evening routine, even in the most challenging circumstances. He would ensure that his sleeping area was as comfortable as possible, using extra furs when available, and positioning himself to take advantage of whatever warmth the shelter provided. He understood that as the leader of the expedition, his own rest was crucial, not just for his personal survival, but for the morale and decision-making capacity that would keep his followers alive. The dreams that came to Eric during those long winter nights were considered by the Vikings to be messages from the gods, guidance for the challenges ahead. The quality of his sleep directly affected his ability to receive and interpret these dreams. Viking culture placed great importance on dream interpretation, and a leader who slept poorly was thought to be cut off from divine guidance. Eric's ability to maintain deep, dream-rich sleep even under extreme stress was seen as a sign of his spiritual strength and his worthiness to lead. As spring returned to Greenland, Eric's well-rested mind began to plan the next phase of his endeavor. The 3 years of exile were ending, and he would need to return to Iceland to recruit settlers for his new land. But this recruitment would require more than just stories of discovery. It would require the credibility that came from having not just survived, but thrived in the unknown. Eric's healthy appearance, sharp mind, and confident demeanor when he returned to Iceland were all testimony to the restorative power of proper sleep, even under the most challenging circumstances. The recruitment campaign that Eric undertook reveals another aspect of Viking sleep culture, the importance of rest in persuasion and leadership. When Eric told his stories of Greenland describing the green valleys he had found, the abundant wildlife, the opportunities for farming and fishing, he did so from a position of obvious health and vitality. His audiences could see that this was not a man broken by hardship, but someone who had been strengthened by his experiences. The quality of his sleep during the exile had preserved not just his physical health, but his charismatic presence. The colonization fleet that Eric assembled for his return to Greenland, 25 ships, carrying over 400 settlers, represents one of the most ambitious undertakings in Viking history. The success of this venture depended on the collective rest and alertness of hundreds of people over several weeks of dangerous ocean sailing. The fleet's organization reveals the Viking understanding that group sleep synchronization was essential for group survival. During the voyage, the ships would travel together during the day and seek shelter together at night whenever possible. This collective approach to rest ensured that all the navigators were equally alert, all the sailors equally strong, and all the decision-makers equally sharp. There were no ships pushing through the night, while others rested, no competitive sleep deprivation that might lead to mistakes or accidents. The fleet moved as a single organism, resting and waking together in harmony with the natural rhythms of day and night. The arrival of Eric's fleet in Greenland marked the beginning of a Norse colony that would endure for nearly 500 years. The longevity of this settlement was built on many factors: agricultural knowledge, trading relationships, technological adaptations, but underlying all of these was the fundamental Norse commitment to proper rest. The colonists brought with them not just tools and livestock, but a culture that valued sleep as essential to survival and success. Eric the Red's later years in Greenland show how the Viking approach to sleep adapted to new environments while maintaining its core principles. The Greenland settlements developed their own rhythms based on the unique seasonal patterns of their new home. The colonists learned to take advantage of the brief but intense summer growing season, working long hours during the midnight sun while embracing extended rest periods during the long polar nights. Eric's legacy extends far beyond his role as an explorer and colonizer. His story demonstrates how proper sleep could enable extraordinary human achievement, how rest could be a form of preparation for the unknown, and how the Viking understanding of sleep as a foundation for success could sustain communities even in the most challenging environments. The red-bearded explorer who was exiled from Iceland became, through his commitment to the timeless wisdom of proper rest, the founder of one of the most remarkable settlements in human history. As we consider Eric's story, we see that his greatest achievement wasn't just the discovery of Greenland or the establishment of its first colony. It was the demonstration that human beings, properly rested and supported by a culture that values sleep, could adapt and thrive in almost any environment. The sleep that sustained Eric through his exile and enabled his success was the same sleep that had sustained Vikings for generations, and it would continue to sustain his descendants for centuries to come. Asterisk mystery, archaeology, culture, the sacred sleep mysteries of the Norse deep within the archaeological record of Viking Age. Scandinavia lies a fascinating mystery that speaks to the profound spiritual significance of sleep in Norse culture. Scattered across Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, archaeologists have discovered what they call sleep chambers, mysterious underground rooms that appear to have been designed specifically for rest and dreaming, yet seem to serve purposes far beyond simple accommodation. These chambers, carved into hillsides or built beneath the floors of important buildings, represent one of the most intriguing aspects of Viking sleep culture. Unlike the communal sleeping arrangements of the longhouses, these spaces were clearly intended for individual use, suggesting that the Vikings understood sleep not just as a biological necessity, but as a deeply personal spiritual practice that required its own sacred space. Imagine descending into one of these chambers, discovered just decades ago near the ancient trading center of Birka in Sweden. The entrance is narrow, requiring you to bend low as you pass through a stone doorway barely wide enough for one person. The passage opens into a small, circular room, perhaps 8 feet in diameter, with a vaulted ceiling that rises just high enough to allow you to stand upright. The walls are lined with carefully fitted stones, and the floor is covered with what were once thick layers of furs and textiles. now preserved only as faint impressions in the earth. What makes these chambers truly mysterious is their apparent connection to the Norse concept of utisita, literally sitting out, a practice that involved spending extended periods in isolation, often in natural or sacred spaces, to receive visions and communicate with the spiritual world. The archaeological evidence suggests that these sleep chambers were designed to facilitate a specific type of rest that blurred the line between sleep and spiritual trance. The construction of these chambers reveals sophisticated understanding of acoustics and sensory deprivation that wouldn't be out of place in a modern sleep clinic. The thick stone walls not only provided insulation from temperature changes, but also created an environment of profound silence. Sound tests conducted in reconstructed chambers show that external noise is reduced to barely perceptible whispers, creating an acoustic environment that would naturally encourage the deep, slow brainwave patterns associated with the most restorative stages of sleep. Archaeological analysis of the chamber floors has revealed traces of specific plants and herbs that were clearly placed there intentionally. Remnants of juniper, meadowsweet, and bog myrtle suggest that these spaces were regularly fumigated with aromatic smoke, creating an atmosphere that would have been both pleasant and potentially consciousness-altering. Modern analysis of these plants reveals compounds that have mild sedative properties, suggesting that the Vikings had developed a sophisticated understanding of how scent could enhance the quality of sleep and dreams. The timing of the construction of these chambers is particularly significant. Radiocarbon dating places most of them in the 9th and 10th centuries, during the height of Viking expansion and cultural development. This suggests that as Viking society became more complex and far-reaching, the need for deep, restorative, and spiritually significant sleep became more important, not less. The chambers represent a cultural investment in sleep that parallels the Vikings' investments in shipbuilding, metalworking, and other technologies essential to their success. Mystery deepens when we consider the Norse literary tradition that describes the practice of prophetic dreaming. The sagas are filled with accounts of individuals who received crucial guidance through dreams, often after periods of ritual preparation that included extended sleep in sacred spaces. The archaeological evidence of the sleep chambers provides physical confirmation of practices that scholars had previously dismissed as purely mythological. One of the most intriguing aspects of these chambers is their apparent connection to the Norse concept of the dream soul, or hugur. Viking belief held that during sleep, a person's hugur could travel beyond the physical body, visiting distant places, communicating with the dead, and receiving knowledge from the gods. The chambers were designed to facilitate this spiritual travel, creating an environment where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds became permeable. The construction details of these chambers reveal even more about Viking sleep wisdom. Many feature small niches carved into the walls, apparently designed to hold oil lamps or candles. The positioning of these niches suggests that they were intended to provide just enough light to create a sense of security, without disturbing the natural darkness that promotes deep sleep. The warm, flickering light would have been similar to the firelight of the longhouses, maintaining the visual cues that helped regulate the body's circadian rhythms. Some chambers contain what archaeologists have termed dream wells, small depressions in the floor that appear to have been filled with water. The purpose of these features is debated, but they may have served as focal points for meditation or as sources of the gentle sound of dripping water that could mask external noise and provide a rhythmic backdrop for sleep. The acoustic properties of water dripping into these wells would have created a natural white noise that modern sleep science recognizes as beneficial for maintaining deep sleep. The location of these chambers is also significant. Many are positioned to take advantage of natural earth energy lines or are built at sites with specific geological properties. Some are located near underground springs, which would have provided both a source of fresh water and the gentle sound of flowing water. Others are positioned to align with astronomical phenomena, suggesting that the Vikings connected their sleep practices to the movements of celestial bodies. Archaeological evidence from the chambers includes remnants of what appear to be specialized sleeping garments, simple linen robes that were distinctly different from everyday clothing. These garments were often bleached white and sometimes decorated with symbols that have been interpreted as protective runes. The practice of changing into special clothing for sleep in these chambers suggests that the Vikings viewed this type of rest as a ritual transformation, a transition from the ordinary world to a realm where different rules applied. The chambers also contain evidence of what might be called sleep offerings, small objects that were apparently left behind by those who used the spaces. These include carved bone combs, small silver pendants, and fragments of decorated textiles. The presence of these objects suggests that the chambers were not just practical spaces, but sacred ones, where valuable items were left as tokens of respect for the spiritual forces that govern sleep and dreams. One of the most fascinating discoveries in these chambers is the presence of what archaeologists call sleep stones, smooth, rounded stones that appear to have been warmed by fire and then placed in the sleeping area to provide gentle, sustained heat. This practice demonstrates the Viking understanding that optimal sleep requires not just darkness and quiet, but also the right temperature. The stones would have provided warmth without the smoke and light of a fire, creating ideal conditions for undisturbed rest. The mystery of these chambers extends to their apparent abandonment. Most show signs of deliberate closure, with the entrances sealed and the chambers filled with earth and stones. This abandonment coincides with the gradual Christianization of Scandinavia, suggesting that the new religion was incompatible with the ancient sleep practices. The Christian emphasis on communal prayer and the rejection of pagan divination practices may have made these intensely personal, spiritually focused sleep spaces seem dangerous or heretical. Yet the influence of these sleep chambers may have persisted in more subtle ways. The Icelandic saga tradition, which flourished in the centuries after the chambers were abandoned, contains numerous accounts of prophetic dreams and visionary experiences that seem to echo the practices once conducted. In these underground spaces, the sagas themselves may be a literary preservation of the wisdom that was once accessed through ritual sleep in sacred chambers. Sleep researchers who have studied the archaeological evidence from these chambers have noted that their design incorporates many elements that contemporary science recognizes as optimal for sleep quality. The controlled temperature, the acoustic isolation, the use of natural materials, and the attention to air quality all align with current understanding of what creates the best environment for restorative rest. The chambers also reveal the Vikings' sophisticated understanding of what we now call sleep hygiene. The evidence suggests that these spaces were used only for sleep, never for eating, working, or other activities. This dedication of space specifically to rest is something that modern sleep experts recommend, but that few people in our multi-purpose living spaces actually achieve. Perhaps most remarkably, the chambers demonstrate that the Vikings understood sleep as a skill that could be developed and refined. The ritualistic aspects of their use, the special clothing, the aromatic fumigation, the careful preparation of the sleeping surface, all suggest that the Vikings viewed sleep not as a passive state, but as an active practice that required attention, preparation, and respect. The mystery of the Viking sleep chambers ultimately reveals a culture that valued rest not just as a biological necessity, but as a gateway to wisdom, spiritual connection, and personal transformation. These underground sanctuaries represent a level of commitment to sleep quality that surpasses even our modern understanding, suggesting that the Vikings may have achieved states of rest and restoration that we, for all our technological advancement, have yet to rediscover. As we contemplate these ancient chambers, we're left with questions that may never be fully answered. What visions did the Vikings receive in these sacred spaces? What wisdom did they access through their ritual sleep? And perhaps most importantly, what have we lost in our modern world by treating sleep as merely a biological function rather than a spiritual practice worthy of sacred space and reverent attention? Segment 4. Social elite contrasting daily life. The sleep hierarchies of Viking society. As we journey deeper into the world of Viking sleep, we discover that not all rest was created equal. The quality, duration, and circumstances of sleep varied dramatically across the social spectrum of Viking society, creating a fascinating hierarchy of rest that reflected the broader structures of power, wealth, and status in medieval Scandinavia. Not at the apex of Viking society stood the Jarls, the noble class whose wealth and status afforded them sleep luxuries that were unimaginable to the common farmer or craftsman. Picture the sleeping chamber of a Jarl's great hall, a space that represented the pinnacle of Viking comfort and sophistication. Here, the sleeping platform was not merely functional, but was crafted as a work of art, with carved wooden posts depicting intricate Norse mythology and inlaid with precious metals that caught the firelight. The bedding of the elite was a testament to their wealth and connections. While a typical Viking farmer might sleep on sheep's wool and local furs, a jarl would rest upon layers of imported silk from the Byzantine Empire, polar bear pelts from the far north, and the finest down from eider ducks. These materials were not just symbols of status, but provided genuinely superior comfort and temperature regulation. The silk, in particular, was prized not only for its luxury, but for its ability to maintain a perfect microclimate against the skin. Neither too warm nor too cool. The Jarls' sleeping arrangements also reflected their access to the most skilled craftspeople in their territories. Their bed frames were often elaborate constructions featuring intricate wood carving, metalwork, and even precious stones. Some archaeological evidence suggests that the most wealthy Vikings had beds with adjustable features platforms that could be raised or lowered, canopies that could be drawn for privacy, and even primitive suspension systems that provided a gentler, more cushioned sleeping surface. But the true luxury of elite Viking sleep lay not just in material comfort, but in the control over their environment that wealth provided. While common Vikings were subject to the collective rhythms of their households and communities, the Jarls could regulate their sleep with unprecedented precision. They had servants whose job it was to maintain the perfect temperature in their sleeping chambers, adding fuel to fires or opening ventilation as needed. Throughout the night, the Jarls also had access to what we might consider the Viking equivalent of sleep medicine. Wealthy Vikings could afford to consult with skilled Vavlur-wise women who specialized in herbal remedies and spiritual practices. These practitioners would create personalized sleep aids using rare and expensive ingredients, imported spices, precious metals ground into powders, and herbs gathered from distant lands. They would also perform rituals designed to ensure peaceful dreams and restful sleep, services that were far beyond the reach of ordinary Vikings. The contrast between elite and common sleep became most pronounced during the harsh winter months. While farmers and craftsmen might huddle together for warmth, sharing body heat and resources, the Jarls could afford to heat their sleeping chambers independently. Archaeological evidence from elite sites shows sophisticated heating systems, including heated floors and carefully designed chimney systems that could warm specific areas without filling them with smoke. The social implications of these sleep disparities were profound. Well-rested Jarls could think more clearly, make better decisions, and maintain their authority more effectively than their sleep-deprived subjects. This created a feedback loop where those with access to better sleep maintained and increased their power, while those without such access found it increasingly difficult to challenge their position. Yet the Viking social system also included a middle tier that reveals the complexity of their sleep culture. The Carl's free farmers who owned their own land occupied a position between the elite jarls and the enslaved thralls. Their sleep arrangements reflected this intermediate status, combining elements of both comfort and practicality. A successful carl might have a private sleeping alcove within the family longhouse, separated from the common areas by hanging tapestries or carved wooden screens. The carls' bedding was typically high quality, but locally produced. They might sleep on fine wool mattresses stuffed with feathers or down, covered with well-made blankets woven from their own sheep's wool. Their sleeping furs were often of excellent quality, perhaps wolf or bear pelts, obtained through hunting or trade, but they lacked the exotic materials that marked the beds of the truly wealthy. The carls also had some control over their sleeping environment, though not to the extent of the jarls. They might have their own small hearths or braziers for warmth, and they could afford to burn better fuel well-seasoned hardwood rather than whatever scraps were available. Some carls even had access to basic luxuries like beeswax candles, which provided cleaner, longer-burning light than the tallow candles or oil lamps used by the common folk. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the thralls, enslaved people, who represented perhaps 20% of Viking society. Their sleep arrangements were a stark reminder of their powerless position. Thralls typically slept on the floor of the longhouse, often near the animals for warmth, with nothing but rough woolen blankets and straw-filled sacks for comfort. They had no control over their sleeping environment, no privacy, and no protection from the cold, noise, or disruption that characterized their daily lives. The sleep of thralls was not only uncomfortable, but uncertain. They were subject to the whims of their masters, who might demand labor at any time of day or night. A thrall's sleep could be interrupted for any reason: to tend a fire, to care for animals, or simply to serve the needs of the household. This chronic sleep deprivation would have affected their health, their ability to work effectively, and their overall quality of life in ways that reinforced their subjugated position. Yet even among the thralls, there were gradations of sleep quality that reflected their value and role within the household. Skilled thralls, those who possessed valuable crafts or abilities, might be granted slightly better sleeping arrangements as a way of maintaining their productivity and health. A thrall who was a skilled metalworker or weaver might have a designated sleeping space and better bedding than a thrall who performed only basic labor. The treatment of thralls. Sleep also varied depending on the character and circumstances of their masters. Some jarls, recognizing that well-rested thralls were more productive, might provide reasonable sleeping conditions as a matter of practical management. Others, driven by cruelty or indifference, might deliberately deprive thralls of sleep as a form of punishment or control. The seasonal patterns of Viking society created additional layers of complexity in sleep. Hierarchies. During the summer months, when daylight extended far into the night, the social distinctions in sleep became less pronounced. Everyone, regardless of status, worked long hours and slept relatively briefly. The elite might still enjoy better comfort, but the fundamental rhythms of life imposed a certain equality of exhaustion. Winter, however, magnified every aspect of sleep inequality. While the wealthy could afford to heat their sleeping chambers and maintain comfortable temperatures throughout the long, dark months, the poor faced genuine hardship. Archaeological evidence from common Viking sites shows that many people suffered from what we would recognize as seasonal affective disorder, depression brought on by the combination of limited daylight and poor sleep quality. The role of women in Viking sleep hierarchies adds another dimension to this social complexity. Viking women, particularly those of high status, had more control over their sleeping arrangements than women in many other medieval societies. A jarl's wife might have her own sleeping chamber, her own servants to attend to her comfort, and her own collection of luxury bedding and sleep aids. She might also have access to the specialized knowledge of other women about herbs, remedies, and practices that could improve sleep quality. Yet even high-status women were subject to constraints that men of similar rank did not face. Pregnancy, childbirth, and nursing created sleep disruptions that no amount of wealth could entirely eliminate. The Viking approach to these challenges reveals both the sophistication of their sleep culture and its limitations. Wealthy women might have wet nurses and servants to minimize sleep disruption, but they still faced the fundamental biological realities of motherhood. The sleep arrangements of Viking children also reflected social hierarchies. The children of Jarls were often provided with their own sleeping spaces from an early age, sometimes even their own small beds crafted by skilled artisans. These children learned early that quality sleep was a privilege of their status, and they grew up with expectations of comfort and control that would shape their adult lives. Children of Jarls typically shared sleeping spaces with their parents or siblings, but they still enjoyed relative comfort and security. Their bedding might be simple but adequate, and they were generally protected from the harsh realities of cold, hunger, and fear that could disrupt sleep. The children of thralls faced the harshest conditions, often sleeping on the floor with minimal bedding and no protection from the noise, cold, and disruption that characterized their families' lives. These children learned early that sleep was a luxury they could not expect, a lesson that would prepare them for the sleep deprivation and discomfort that would characterize their adult lives if they remained in bondage. The contrast between elite and common sleep in Viking society extended beyond mere comfort to encompass different relationships with time itself. The wealthy could afford to sleep when they were tired and wake when they were rested, following natural rhythms that optimized their physical and mental health. The poor, by contrast, had to sleep when work permitted and wake when labor demanded, creating chronic misalignment between their biological needs and their social obligations. This temporal freedom of the elite had profound implications for their cognitive abilities and decision-making capacity. Well-rested Jarls could engage in complex planning, negotiate effectively, and maintain the mental agility necessary for leadership. Sleep-deprived thralls, by contrast, were limited to simple, repetitive tasks that did not require sharp thinking or creative problem-solving. Yet Viking society also contained mechanisms that could occasionally disrupt these sleep hierarchies. During times of crisis raids, natural disasters, or social upheaval, the normal patterns of sleep and rest might be temporarily suspended. In these moments, the fundamental human need for sleep could create unexpected bonds between different social classes, as everyone faced similar challenges of exhaustion and recovery. The legacy of Viking sleep hierarchies extends far beyond their immediate historical context. The patterns they established where wealth provides access to better rest, and better rest reinforces wealth, can be seen in our modern world. The executive who sleeps in luxury hotels while traveling, the worker who struggles with shift work and inadequate housing, the child whose family's economic status determines the quality of their bedroom. These are all echoes of the social structures that governed Viking sleep over 1,000 years ago. As we reflect on these ancient hierarchies, we might consider how the Vikings' understanding of sleep as both a biological necessity and a social privilege continues to shape our world today. The quality of our rest remains tied to our economic resources, our social position, and our access to the knowledge and materials that can improve sleep. In this sense, we are not so different from the Vikings, still navigating the complex relationship between sleep, power, and social structure in our daily lives.